Hey guys, this is As an Atheist Films on YouTube, and this is going to be a review of the Hanwei Tori. We're going to go over the brief specs, or what it's made out of, how my opinion of it, and then we're going to take it apart and then look more closely onto the blade and then the fittings and the rest of the sword. We're going to start with the blade. The blade is a 28-inch K120C Swiss powdered steel. The metal itself is actually likely made in Japan through Swiss licensing. The company that originally makes this or licenses it is ASAP, ASSAB. The composition is not entirely known. What is known is that it's similar to 1095-ish type of steel, but with a little bit of, I believe, it was manganese instead of with having no manganese. So it's similar to like a T10 with manganese, because sometimes they do add manganese to T10, even though it's supposed to be a 1095 counterpart or copy, so to speak. The Chinese do their own thing whenever they feel like it needs to be improved. But it's kind of take that with a grain of salt. Now, this is part of their forge folded models. In the past, and we're talking well over 10, 15 years ago, I want to say, whenever they would make forge folded models, they would actually advertise them as non-cutters, or they would advertise them for EI. The K120C, from what I remember, whenever they were coming out with them a while back, was that they were advertising them as light cutters. They were not being advertised as heavy cutters, but they were being advertised as light cutters, meaning you could cut tatami mats, single tatami mats. They did not recommend bamboo, if I remember correctly, but they recommended that you could actually cut with these particular swords. Now, that's actually interesting because most places that sell forge folded swords will either say that's for EI, just for practice only, or they will say that it'll have to be limited to very light cutting, but they don't really warrant against that kind of use. Now, I believe there's a very good reason for that. Those familiar with metallurgy and how metals are produced through the normal casting of billets, they know that there is a difference in cooling of the billet, where the billet starts to solidify, and basically what happens is they just melt the steel. They melt the steel in a very large crucible. Once it's melted there, it is then poured onto billet molds, or whatever they may be using, but billet molds usually, and it's poured on there. Now, in liquid form, the metal is fairly homogeneous. The metal is very liquid, so all the particles, the particles can move around and rearrange themselves to be fairly homogeneous. Now, when the billet is then poured onto and then cools, there is a mixture of solids as the billet cools down. Obviously, it's going to cool at different rates. Not all of it's going to cool down at the same time, but it's going to cool at different rates. So you're going to have some areas that are solid while other areas are still liquid. And this leads to a slight difference in content, in the actual metallurgy content. That's why if you take a billet from the foundry, from the place making the steel, and you test one section of the billet and you test another section of the billet, there's going to be some slight differences. Now, why am I bringing this up? When you're doing a forge folded blade, the method of welding the steel changes depending on the metallurgy of the metal. If the metallurgy of the metal is different, you need to change the welding approach and the temperatures too. Some of the steels will, because what you need to do with welding essentially is to take the steel to a temperature that's hot enough that it's close to the melting point of it, but not quite there, because you don't want it to turn into liquid. You still want it in a solid form. So you take it up pretty high up and close to that, and then you fold the steel over, and then you essentially weld it utilizing a catalyst, like what's one of the chemicals that's used? Borax, or something like that. So that's how you can do like a pattern. That's how you can do a welding of its own steel. So because of the fact that when you take a billet and it's already, not perfectly homogeneous, and you're folding over onto itself, there are some slight chances that you're going to be hitting those areas that cooled first, and then later, hitting another or area that cooled later, and its carbon content might be less, or its chemical composition will be a little bit different. And then you forge fold it thinking, hey, I got this temperature right. You forge fold it and you have a lamination failure, a welding failure. And then you got to toss that blade because there's something you can do about it. However, what if you can make a steel in a highly homogeneous manner where it's basically perfect from one end of the billet to the other end of the billet, and you can actually rearrange the grain structure depending on how you spray the steel and how you cool and how it is pressurized and everything. You can actually have a very uniform, not only with composition, but also with the way that the grain structure is patterned. So if you look at grain structure in a normal cast, steel ingot, the grain pattern is very all over the place, and that's why you need to do heat treatment and all of that to kind of help rearrange that. Well, what if steel's already like that from the get-go? That will save you a lot of time. It saves money on failed blades that did not weld accordingly, because now you have a very homogeneous steel, so you don't have to worry about differing temperatures. You can get a process down in a factory setting. Now keep in mind, if this was a custom made blade, right, you can make it out of whatever steel, 1095, you can make it out of 1075, you can make it out of 01, you can make it out of semi stainless if you wanted to. You can make it out of all these different types of steels because that's a custom made blade. The smith can take the time for each and every single weld to be done properly. And if it doesn't get done properly, it gets tossed back in the oven or back in the forge, heat it up again until they notice that welding is done correctly. So there's a lot more attention to detail, but those swords are going to cost a lot more money. In a factory setting, they can't afford that. So I understand why they went with the powder steel. It makes perfect sense why they would do that for a production sword. So they have homogeny, they have repeatability, and any random smith can just go ahead and do this for them. They don't have to go get a master smith to forge weld this sword. Moving on, sorry I talked too much about that. It's just something that was very interesting to me, that I noticed that at a certain point when K120C got introduced, Hanwei stopped doing any kind of forge foldings unless it was using that particular steel, and I'm pretty certain that it was related to pattern welding issues in a production environment. Moving on, the koshire, or the fittings of the blade, are, from what I understand, steel. We're going to take a closer look at these a little bit later when I crack this blade open, but they are steel from what I understand. The casting quality on this particular Hanwei line is not the best that Hanwei has offered. It is still above well above what other people offer for steel castings that are, $200 or $300 each koshire piece, like $200 or $300 for the suba, $200 or $300 for the kashira, $200 or $300 for the, fuchi. For the casting quality, it's good. It is good. It's just not up to Hanwei's normal standards. And that's the only reason why I'm critiquing it a little bit, is that Hanwei is capable of producing much better castings. It's just, for this sword in particular, they didn't do it. For what reason, I am not sure. The wrap on the sword is brown leather. Now, this is their nutbuck leather. They don't call it nutbuck, but it's basically like they're taking the underside of the leather instead of the upper side or the upper grain. They're taking the underside and showcasing that, and it's a little bit more matte, more like nutbuck. The leather is very good. It's held up. It's quite tight in most of the places. The only places where it's not tight at all is where the mekugi, or the bamboo pins, are located. And I have a feeling that they did that on purpose so that you can move the the ito aside and pull the mekugi pins out. Hanwei does like for their swords to be maintained properly. So they normally will give you a guide that shows you how to take your sword apart and how to put it back together and how to maintain it, how to clean it, how to oil it, that type of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that that happened, because in every other area, the Ito is very nice and tight. It's good. It's very good actually for Hanwei. Hanwei has a reputation, especially back whenever I was still collecting swords in 2015 and earlier, all the way down to like 2009-ish. They had a reputation for having Ito that was very hit or miss, where it would be like really, really tight or it would be a little bit too loose to the point where like you just had to rewrap it. But most of the times it was functional. Like most of the times it'd be functional. It's just, yeah, it was just a thing that people would get bothered by, because Hanwei swords did come at a slight premium and it didn't offer better steels. It didn't offer a lot of things. And now as somebody that's grown older, I kind of respect that they didn't do that, because they didn't want to produce super high-end steels but give out mediocre product because nobody knows how to use it. Nobody knows how to forge it. Anyways, the Ito's done very well. There is no Hishigami. There is no paper underneath. Hanwei doesn't typically do that. It's just wrapped over. It's functional and it works. The end knots are actually surprisingly very tight. Like, I was actually surprised that they had end knots that tight on leather Ito, which is, if you've done any kind of leather, any kind of Ito work or Tsukamaki, you know that leather's the hardest material to work with for Ito, because either it stretches too much and you got to start all over, or if you get non-stretchy leather, which you can get from Japan, or you can get Hanwei's Ito when they still sold it. I can't find any place that sells it anymore, but you used to be able to buy this particular Ito from, not from Hanwei, but you could buy it from like a vendor, and then they had a connection with Casaveria, and they were able to get it from them. I don't know if it was, I could be remembering incorrectly, but it could have been Nikon Sashi, or it was another company that was selling this notebook material that comes from Hanwei, and it was non-stretchy. So some people used it. It was really expensive though. I think it was like $10. It was really expensive. I think $10 an inch or something like that. It was really, really expensive for material. Like, it was basically costing more than what it would cost to wrap it and the material for other types of like silk, like Japanese silk. Anyways, Ito is very nicely done. End knot is very, very tight. Everything's pretty tight on here. The habaki is brass and it's got a scratch pattern that mimics rain. The seppa, or the spacers here, are brass, standard Hanwei brass fittings, standard brass habaki. Only difference is the scratched patterns. The blade has a similar, like I would probably say like a Gunome Midori, Gumone Midori Hamon. The Hada is one that I'm having trouble figuring out if this is Mekume, which is wood pattern, or if it's just standard, I think Medare or wavy Hada. I'm going to say it's probably more Medare. It's just, I don't think the person that was making this blade was folding it in a very specific way to get a very specific pattern, like wooden pattern. My other sword that I got from Shinken Sword, that one is a Mekume pattern for sure, a wood style pattern. But that's because it takes intentional folding to create that pattern. This one I'm gonna say is probably Gunome or wavy pattern over Mekume, because the wood burls are not as accentuated as other pieces that I've had in the past. Let's go ahead and look at the saya now. The saya is a two-toned saya. You have your black rattan wrapped saya, which adds reinforcement and protection during draw cuts, or incorrectly done draw cuts. So if for some reason your blade goes through the actual scabbard wood, it is hard wood, but it is also in an area where there's normally a seam. Most of the scabbards are two-piece, or all the scabbards are two-piece, and then they're joined together. Typically the seam would be right there. Now in proper saya making, that seam will be offset. Same thing with the suka. The seam will be offset to account for that type of issue. where the suka will not be splitting in half because it's right, in the middle of the nekago. Typically the suka is offset just a little bit, and then the saya would also be offset a little bit on the seam. Now it'll still be perfectly in the middle. It's just going to be offset. The seam will be a little bit to one side or a little bit to the other side. That's something that's more on the finer details of things for Japanese swords, but that's something that you would expect from an actual Japanese made, or nihonto, if you will, or shinken, if you will, whatever you want to call it. The rattan wrap, though, acts as a reinforcement to the saya to keep it from splitting from repeated use, and also to help add a little bit of protection in the event that the blade goes through the saya, and there is that. Other practices are to use a metal shim on the koiguchi on the ha side. And some places like there was a kotetsu, I think it's called, kotetsu. They used to add a metal piece there for that particular reason during draw cuts. It makes it basically impossible for the blade to cut through that blade and then end up cutting yourself. And that was done for practical reasons, because that does happen. Trust me. I've heard of instances of that happening where the blade will go through the scabbard and cut somebody's hand really, 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 really bad. These swords are very sharp. The rest of the saya is brown in an ishime pattern or eggshell finish. So if you go look at an egg, same finish, little specks of whatever it may be. It almost looks like they put specks or something and then sprayed right over it. It's a really nice pattern. I really, really love this ishime finish. It holds up really well to fingerprints. You can't really tell. And it also is typically, because of the multi-coat requirement for these things to work properly, it means that the paint usually is thicker, so it'll last a little bit longer than, say, a piano gloss or something of that nature. Let's go ahead and take this sword apart, and then we can look at the koshere in more in detail and the blade. We're going to go ahead and get this blade down here. Going to get a punch. Normally you would use I think it's called a Mikugi Ana, a Mikugi hammer, but I don't really keep one of those anymore, so we're going to just use regular punches and a regular hammer and a regular rubber. We've loosened it. I'm not going to, it still needs to be loosened. There we go. We got one Mikugi out. Let's get the other one out. Let's move that over to the side. And then we're going to take this. And make sure when you do this, if you are going to use something to push. Sorry guys, let me hold this a little better. Nope, I'm going to stop there. I'm feeling resistance, so that's probably, it's the Ito keeping it from coming out. Okay, we got the other Mikugi out. And now that we have the blade loose, you can hold it out like this. Hit it a couple times. It'll loosen it like that. And let me show that again. And that's normally how you would do it whenever the nakago sits really well with the suka, meaning it's got a good fit. We're gonna put that away. And then this one is, from what I remember, it was a little. Sorry guys, these things are fitted pretty well in my opinion. And then once you get, there we go. All right, now it's nice and loose. Let's take these out. I'll get that in a second. And then let's go ahead and put the blade down, rest it, so that we don't go cutting ourselves. Let me pick up that other seppa. And whenever I put this sword back together, I'm always going to be very careful to keep the seppa in the correct alignment, meaning one went over, one went under. So I know that this portion is the piece that goes on top, or like that. So I know that this piece is the upper part. Let's go ahead and take a look at the habaki. We're gonna zoom in instead so that we get a nicer, let's see here, there we go. The habaki is brass. It fits pretty well on the blade. It's got a nice little scratch pattern. I'm not gonna show this too much. It's your standard, Hanwei habaki, guys. It's really nothing special, nothing fancy. It's nice. Let's put that to the side. Your standard seppa from Hanwei, scalloped on the edges. It is cut down or filed down. Looks here like they just used a straight grinder to do that. And they do that for the reason of the Suba being a moko style. And it's got those 4 little humps on the sides, and then it's got those cutouts there. One actually has a cutout that was normally made for a additional blade to hide in the scabbard, and that blade would have been a utility blade. No, I'm sorry guys, it's not focusing as well as I thought it should. Sorry about that, guys. My camera sometimes has issues focusing. But there's the Suba. It's got some nice detail to it. It's not crazy, but it's also not the best. And then here on the side, on the other side, you can see more of the swan, or the crane motif. And this is actually the only place where you'll find a crane. There's no other crane anywhere else on the Suba. I mean on the sword or on the koshire. But that's, I guess, where the whole crane or Tori comes from. Also, Tori is also a type of sori, or blade curvature. So this has a Tori sori, and it has the crane motif. So kind of slick on Hanwei to pull that. So I guess it was incorrect that this is the only place where you will find the crane reference. But anyways, really nice Suba, and this is again steel, so it's really nice and dense and very hard. This is going to do a really good job of protecting your hand. Let's continue on with the Suka. The Suka is a really nice, very attractive handle. It really is. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can get the whole handle there. Here's the handle. Very attractive with the brown leather ito over the black Samigawa. The Samigawa is not the highest quality, but it does feature a hidden Emperor's node. Right on that diamond right there, there's a little hump that you'll see, and that is a Emperor's node that the Samigawa has. It's a shame that it's hidden, but it is what it is. Let's look at the Suka. The Suka, you can see here, it's got some interesting choices. For example, there's something weird here where it almost looks like there was a wood imperfection in the Suka, and they ended up having to carve either like a tunnel, or I don't know. They did something here where it looks like it's potentially that they either added a piece of wood, maybe when they were carving the tunnel for the Samigawa, they went too far in, but it looks to me like they added a piece of wood and then glued it on so that the kashira would sit here really nice and be fitted really good. Like, there is no real movement there at all. Nothing that you can feel. But Suka is nicely done. Y'all saw the fit on there. It fit really, really well. And that's how you normally want your Suka to fit. You want it to be completely nice and fitted, and only the last, 2, 3, maybe 4 millimeters will you have some tension, and that's what you normally want. You do not want it to be too tensioned the entire way, because that is going to lead to Suka splitting or cracking. Really nice work there, Hanwei. Let's look here and see if we can take a close-up of the menuki, or the ornaments. This is one of the parts that I don't understand at all. If somebody from Hanwei can elaborate, or if somebody knows some type of reference between cranes and kabuto helmets, somebody please let me know. The only thing that I can think of, and this is pure guess and speculation, is that some kabuto helmets have these very large, what looks to me like the shape of wings of a bird on the helmet. And I wonder if they were trying to mimic cranes whenever they did that. That's really the only thing I could think of that can maybe make sense as to why they would put kabuto helmets for the menuki on a sword that is supposed to be Tori themed. But maybe somebody can give me more information. And then there's the kashira. Again, no bird. Like I said, that's the suba is the only place. The suba and the curvature of the blade are the only two places that have a reference of a crane. But yeah, really, really nice. Hold on. Maybe maybe too close. No, okay. There we go. All right, that should help. There we go. Much better. And that's basically it. On the other side, it's blank. It does have a little bit of a textured finish to it, so it's kind of nice still. But, like I said, I think Hanwei has done better. Now, the star of the show, the blade. Let's first start with the Nekago. And for this, I'm going to take the camera off of the tripod. And I'm going to try to do my best to showcase the blade. It's a really attractive blade, in my opinion. So here we have the Nekago. The Nekago has filings, and it is properly rounded shape. There are many different types of Nekago. Keep in mind, all of this was done with machine. Nothing here was done by hand or hammer forging or anything like that. They did this all with more than likely power tools to shape it. And then they went in and filed the Nekago, which is traditional. Normally they do file this Nekago in a traditional sword, and it is to add friction and to add fit onto the suka. They have something scribbled, some probably Chinese characters scribbled on the Nekago, and from what I understand, this is normal for Hanwei's higher end swords. They will put the name of the forge, which is basically, I think they just put Paul Chen, if I'm not mistaken. But if anybody can read that, you can let me know what it says. And then underneath, they typically put the date or some type of date manufacturing code to kind of tell you when the sword was made. Let's go ahead and move on. If we look at the blade, you will see that the Munimaki and the Hamaki are almost on the same plane. The Munimaki is this little notch here in the back, and then the Hamaki is the notch up there, which is where the blade or the edge starts. Normally you want to see them in the same plane. However, production sword, factory setting, can't really blame them. Moving on, you have a very beautiful hada. on the blade. I'm gonna have to probably, let me see if I can move this a little closer to provide the amount of light that we need. And let me angle the camera to see if we can make this work, guys. I do apologize, but capturing the hada on this sword is, there we go. That should do it. That's the hada. I'm not going to show the entire blade like this because quite frankly, I've tried to do that and it's really difficult. But that's the hada. You guys can see there. You might be able to tell faint signs of the hamon. The hamon is better seen on a very, basically you look towards the light, you put the blade up to the light, and basically you let the light kind of lay on the blade, and then the hamon pop, like insanely pop. And that's normally how you look at hamon. Now let's go ahead and go back, and we're gonna just show you the more of a further out view of the blade. I have a couple lights on this particular sword, so it should be fairly well illuminated. You guys can see there, oh, there you go. You guys can see the hamon. That beautiful gunome medari mixture of a hamon. And then the kasaki. The kasaki is the point of the blade, and it refers to the ha of the point, meaning the edge. You have two parts on the blade: the ha, which is this part right here, and you have the shinogi, which is the spine. So the kasaki, you are referring to the point, meaning where the yokote, or the transition line between the normal ha and the kasaki begins. That's the yokote. In this case, it's a physical yokote or geometric yokote, meaning that there's an actual change in plane between the ha and the kasaki, and that is what tells you where the kasaki begins. The rest of the kasaki traditionally would be counter polished compared to the blade, or it could have either a counter polish or a similar polish, except more of a matte finish. So instead of hitting it with mirror finishing stones, they'll probably hit it with a hada stone to make it a little darker. And that's done to accentuate the boshi, which is the hamon that goes into the kasaki. The boshi is the little curvature of the hamon. The hamon does not just go straight down, it actually goes straight, and then once it gets almost close to the end, it tapers back into the blade. And that's what we have here. We do have a nice boshi there. So that's normally what you would see on a hamon and on a Japanese blade. And then again, you guys can see there some of that the pattern on the hamon there. You guys can tell on the camera. I can look at it from the viewfinder here, and it is quite nice. Like I said, one of the best ways to do it is to have a light source on the side like that, and then have it lay its light across the blade while you look at it from the opposite side, and that's how you get the hamon to stand out. And that's for people who maybe are not familiar with how hamon should look. That's kind of how you do it. Now the hamon should also go all the way into the habaki, and then eventually trail off here into the nakago. Nakago, I forgot the word that they describe this side of the nakago, but it's basically going to go up towards the blade, towards the ha side. That is the Hanwei Tori. This has been a pretty long review. I ranted quite a bit about metallurgy and other stuff. I do apologize, and actually let me put this back into autofocus. Hey there guys, I almost forgot to put the sword back together for y'all. Let's go ahead and get started. I have a little towel here to kind of help me, aid me in this process, and also to wipe off some of this gunk. That gunk is from the Cape Cod polish rag that I used, and that should do it. All right. First thing is first, the hibaki. Very nicely fitted. A little bit of wiggle room, but that's normal for production swords. Not making excuses, just pointing out that it is a production sword, not a custom piece. Yeah, maybe there should be no real flaws there. Here I am lining up the seppa to look really nice and presentable. Okay, I want to say that looks... That looks good. Actually, hold on. I am making sure that this blade is... Let's see here. Yep, that looks good. Perfect. And now the other seppa. I made sure to keep the seppa in a... so I know which one was up and down. There we go. And now the suka goes right on there. Like I said, last few millimeters, last couple millimeters are the ones that you need to be nice and tight. Give it a nice little tug from the bottom. Normally you would want to put your hand here and then strike it up, but this is not some Nihonto or highly valued sword, so I could just smack it with my hand and it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Now, this is where... There we go. The mikugi is in. And again, the mikugi are going in the same way that they went in, that they were taken out. And now this is where that little... Nope. Yep, that works. Let's push the... There we go. There we go. I don't want any fucking leches on my sword. Pardon my language. Nope, not quite all the way in. Let's switch to the pointy side. There we go. Yes, that's perfect. All right, let's push the Ito back in. And now we have a fully assembled sword. If you hit it and you feel like it's vibrating and you hear a lot of metal clanking, that means it's not tight. If you ever have that, you can do two things. If it's very, very minor, you're talking like a paper thin level of spacing, you can literally just take a piece of paper, stick it in the kashira to kind of help snug it all up, and then push it all the way in, and that usually fixes it. If it's more than a piece of paper of width or thickness, then you're gonna need to buy slightly thicker seppas, and that's how you normally do it. And if it's really dramatic, where it's like a seppa's worth of thing, then you add an additional seppa. That's normal. It's not normal, sorry. That is common for swords that are used to have that. And now we're going to inspect this sword. Make sure that we haven't damaged it in any shape, way, or form. And if we have, we want to clean it up. Or if we left a little smudge, clean it up. Because that can lead to rust spots or staining on the blade, on a carbon steel blade. That looks good. Habaki. Nice and clean. Let's see. Yep, looks good. Seppa looks a little corrupt, but it could just be marks from filing. Looks good, very well centered. A little meh, just a tiny bit. Oh no, actually, never mind. No, it's actually well centered. super well centered. Kashira looks good. A little bit of a gap in between the back and front, but that's how it was. All right, that's basically it, guys. Like and subscribe. Comment if you have any questions regarding the sword or regarding any other swords. And yeah, you'll have a good one.